If you go through my backlog of videos, you'll see that I've actually been testing the small micro class stuff for a long time now. Way back when, like 2.5 years ago, I started building 3-inch and 3.5-inch stuff, looking for, you know, something that can perform similarly to a 5-inch in a tight little package. And just all along the way, I've been looking for that same thing because I want something tiny that can perform like my 5-inch. So recently I've taken more of an interest in 2.5-inch again because the electronics have just stepped up so far that they're actually really good and really useful now. And I'm really happy to say that pretty much everything I've tested that has been made somewhat recently is all good. It all works, which is a huge benefit because all the old stuff that I used to test was really wonky and never really worked very well. Okay, so I'm going to start off with probably the most useful piece of information for anybody that has any experience in this area, which is this thing. This is the Eachine DTX03, and it's surprisingly from Eachine, but it's actually pretty good. And there's only one real deal breaker for me. In order to get this thing to record, it records on a micro SD card, which you slide in right there. In order to get this thing to record, you have to power it up and then push this button. And then to get it to stop recording, you have to push this button again. And if the power gets cut halfway through or in the middle of your flight in a crash or something, it doesn't record the file. It doesn't even save the corrupted file. It doesn't save anything. It's pretty unfortunate, and it's a pretty annoying problem. I have a couple other HD DVRs, or not HD, just onboard DVRs on the way for testing for the same kind of thing because I'm not a super big fan of the VTX in this either. But yeah, I've been testing kind of all these little tiny cameras, looking for the best kind of quality you can get from something in a micro class, either it be an onboard DVR or the Runcam Mini split or the SQ12 or the Cyclops 3 that I have on the way. And I'm hoping that one of them will kind of meet the criteria that I'm looking for. One thing to note about this DTX03, this is the quad that I have it in. And you can see that I'm using the HGLRC Zeus in this quad, and I kind of had to, unless I wanted to make my stack super duper tall, because this thing it's pretty chunky. It's a lot bigger than I expected. I actually expected to put it in this frame, but I don't think it's going to comfortably fit in this frame, so it's just kind of like a no-go. Unfortunately, the mini split did not work out, so I have not even... I mean, I just took it for parts, and actually I'm going to take more parts off it too. So when I restarted looking into these micros, I wanted something that was super cheap that I could, you know, fly around anywhere, anytime, and not care about at all. And this is the thing that started that, and this is about $50, $60 to build. All the parts and everything that I'm talking about is in the description below. I could talk forever if I just kept talking about everything about every part. So this thing is pretty good. If you want something cheap that just you don't have to really worry about too much. It's unfortunately really anemic in its performance on 1S, but it's surprisingly good for 1S performance. But then I stepped it up past that, and I really wanted to have a super cheap brushless kind of category quad that's super duper light. This thing has a 50-gram all-up weight. This thing is using the same props, but it's using these prototype motors from a company I can't tell you. They are freaking bonkers motors. They have the strongest magnets for any tiny motor that I've ever felt, and the company told me that if they were to sell this motor, they'd have to sell it for about $35 because of the quality and everything they put into it. So this thing is freaking bonkers, but this motor, it's 8500 kV motor. It will never come out because it's too expensive to make. So the company is actually working on an 1104 that is very similar, that will be much more cost effective, and it's about the same weight. It's actually a little bit lighter than this motor, and it's going to have the same power. So this quad runs on 2S, and again, I don't have the batteries with me, but it runs on 2S that I'm taking 4S Tattoo 450 milliamp packs and cutting them up and turning them into 2S packs. I found that that's the most reliable way for me to get good performing 2S packs because these tiny little packs are so difficult to source. This frame is 6 grams. This is the 1.5 gram version, or the 1.5 millimeter version. This is the 2 millimeter version, and my concept with these two versions are: one will be super light, which is intended for sub 80 gram all-up weight, and one will be a little bit stronger, intended for 1106 size motors. This canopy was printed for me by Brain 3D. I appreciate him very much. Yeah, this is a neat little design, but I'll tell you more about why I'm not a huge fan of it anymore. So this is a build with the Sunny Sky 1104 motors, 8500 kV. And these motors with these props on 2S perform the same as these motors and these props on 2S, but this thing weighs about 10 grams more overall. And something about this particular this size quad that I'm showing is that these are both using this. I don't even know where it's from. I think it's from Happy Model. This is a 16 by 16 4-in-1 ESC that does 2S. By the way, it does not do 1S, even though it says it does 1S. It doesn't even power up on 1S. And the flight controller, which has an OSD built in. And this is the first thing that I tested, because this thing is $26. It's an F4. It's an F4 on a 16 by 16 board. It's $26. And it performs fantastic on 2S. I can't even believe it. I have 4 of these things. I've given one quad to somebody else. Every single one works flawlessly, and it's not that difficult to solder up for something that's so tiny, and it just works shockingly well. So this class, this quad, this cheap-ish quad that I have here that runs on 2S is actually viable, I think. Unfortunately, the cost of this will still be about $130, which is in the price range of the Babyhawk R. And I'm going to tell you right now that the Babyhawk R is the best imaginable deal in this size class. Also, the Diatone GTR90 is also a great buy, and it's because they perform fantastic. And you get, if you just bought the Babyhawk R for the motors, flight stack, and the Fpv camera and other stuff, you would be ahead, because it's very, very, very cost effective. More on that in a bit. Okay, so this class, using these 66mm props, this 66mm prop is pretty magical, because it just performs shockingly well for what it is. It's been cloned by King Kong, and the King Kong version is in this very nice polycarbonate material. If you're going to build something of this size, of this kind of tiny little class, super light class, I would highly recommend just sticking to the 66mm prop. I've talked to so many people in this micro community. They are all so incredibly helpful. A lot of them are listed in the description below. They are the most helpful people of any community I've been a part of. It includes 3D printing and cars and just everything. I've done so much stuff, and these guys are super, super, super duper helpful. They all say that this prop is just like a golden prop for some odd reason. Okay, so once you step past this kind of like super lower cost, low end 2S kind of build, you get into the larger 3S builds. And this is where it kind of gets a lot more interesting, because this is where I've found a lot of differences. So 2.5 inch is what I'm going for, because 3 inch is a little big. It kind of becomes a real quad at 3 inches, and 2.5 inches is seen as a toy by the general public. And forget about the weight or anything else. People look at this thing like it's a toy, and honestly, it freaking looks like a toy. Look how fun it looks. But I'm not going to 3 inch because of that primary reason, and also because, and I'm not going out to 2 inch because 2 inch is very ineffective. If you saw my, I think, 2 videos ago, the disc area of a 2 inch prop is much, much less than a 2.5 inch. And then when you step up to 3 inch, it's also much, much bigger. But 2 inch is kind of, 2.5 inch is kind of that threshold where you start getting a lot more performance from the prop and the drivetrain. So sticking to the 2.5 inch class. That being said, this prop from Dahl, which I don't even know what the name is. I think it's 2035. Yeah, 2035. This prop from Dahl, it recently came out. It's a 2 inch prop, and I think it's very, very similar to the Avan Micro in performance. It actually performs great. It performs really, really well, almost like these 2.5 inch props, except it has a little bit less top end and a little bit less bottom end, which you would expect from a 2.5 inch prop. Continuing that note, this is the Gemfan 2540 prop. It is a stellar, stellar prop. This is the HQ 2.5 by 3.5 by 3 V1S prop, and yeah, the Gemfan is the best prop. But I've tried a lot of 2.5, 2.4, 2.3, 2.6, 2.8 inch props over the time that I've been testing these things. The Gemfan 2540 is definitely the best prop. And in a very close second, I put this King Kong quad blade prop. This is the 2535 King Kong quad blade. It is a copy of the Rotor X prop. I know it's very unfortunate. And King Kong is in lawsuits with a lot of companies in China, a lot of companies, multiple. I talk to them on a regular basis, and 3 of them are telling me that they're constantly in lawsuit with King Kong because they just copy a whole bunch of stuff, not just props, and not just under the name King Kong. So unfortunately, it's a very copy company. But that being said, the Rotor X version of this prop comes in a very brittle material, and this comes in a very nice polycarbonate material. So while King Kong is copying stuff, this is actually it's a really good prop. The difference between this prop and the Gemfan 2540 is that you get just higher sense of control with the quad blade prop, similar to a 5-inch. When you put quad blades on a 5-inch, it's like intoxicating. You get this intoxicating level of grip and control and punch and everything, just got a little bit lower top end speed. And that's what you get with this prop too. You get a lot more punch, a lot more control, just a little bit less top end speed, and you get a little bit less efficiency. So if I was going to choose one general all-around prop for the 2.5-inch class, you can't really beat the 2540 right now. Test anything else that comes out after the 2540, but for now, if you only bought that prop, you wouldn't be wrong to buy that prop. Now on to motors. I have been using a lot of motors in this class, from RCX to Brother Hobby to this Eagle Power crap to the Eachine, the Eachine motors to the HGLRC motors. I think the Eachine motors are HGLRC motors. I don't know. And then the Racer Star motors, of course. And I will tell you, just like 5-inch, these super cheap motors, not good. Don't buy them. I know, even though a lot of the community that I talk to has said, the Racer Star motors are great. They perform like fine. They're not the best, but they perform great. Keeps us in the air, keeps us flying. They are really, really low quality. And like this motor, it comes with wires that they're not stranded wires. They're just the windings that come off the actual stator. The magnets are very weak. The motor is very unbalanced. It's not powerful, and this is the same thing that I've noticed on pretty much all these tiny little cheap motors. And honestly, this motor is not even that cheap. It's like $9. Don't get this motor. It's not a good motor. It's honestly a waste of your money. You're probably going to break it before you even fly it. And if you have to rebuy your motors, it's just becoming far more expensive. So this is, again, a plea not to buy super cheap motors. That being said, DYS has recently made their kind of 5-inch lineup, the 2206, 2306, and 2207. They all have weird names to them. You probably know what they are. They're $9.99 each. I haven't used them yet, but I've seen other people using them, and they're pretty good. For $10, I don't think you can get a better motor. And that's pretty good. But we don't have that kind of motor in this size class yet. So I'm going to say that if you're trying to build a super light, super tiny little 2.5-inch, go for an 1104, 1105. In fact, most 1104s are 1105, which was a pretty neat finding. And you want about 10,000 kV or 9,000 to 10,000-ish kV for 2.5, 2.6-inch on a super light 2S quad. After that, which is what I would primarily recommend, is kind of the Babyhawk class quad, which is the real discussion that I'm finally getting to. And if you skip to here, sorry about all the stuff before. So I have tested a bunch of stacks. The Hobbywing stack, I think it's out now. I'm not sure if it's out yet. The HGLRC stacks, the Zeus, and the Ori 32-bit in this one, which I tried to get current sensing off of, but the Hobbywing flight controller, which says it does current sensing, doesn't actually have a current sense pin, so that's pretty unfortunate. And here's what I'll tell you. Similar, once again, to 5-inch, the ESC that can produce the most power, meaning the one that's rated to a higher amperage, tends to perform better because it could probably handle the amps a little bit better. When you're using a little tiny 20x20 that can only supply 20 amps and you're trying to run a 5-inch prop on it, or big 22 whatever motors, it flies fine, but if you compare it to a 4-in-1 that does 35 amps or 40 amps, or at least is claiming to do that, you get a different sensation of performance completely. The one that's higher amperage rated, you get much more direct power, the PIDs are actually easier to tune, everything just works better. And that is exhibited very, very obviously in this class as well. When I'm running the HGLRC, I think 15 amp 4-in-1 stack, it's good, but when I compare it against a 4-in-1 that does 20 amps, or is at least rated to 20 amps, or the HGLRC one that's rated to 40 amps, it's a different level of performance. you want an ESC that can perform beyond where you are pushing it. And so the Ori 4-in-1, which is it's 32-bit, but I'm not sure that actually matters. I think it's just because the FETs on there are really designed to fully do 4S, and the ESC has been designed for a 5-inch. It hasn't been designed for a 2.5-inch or 2-inch class. So this stack in this quad, it could run a full-blown 5-inch race setup without much trouble. Whereas the Zeus, the HGLRC Zeus, has 15 amp rated ESCs on board, and so the PIDs are more difficult to tune. It flies a little bit more wonky, and it's just not generally as good as the ESC that's rated higher. That being said, probably the best stack I've found in this size class so far is the Hobbywing stack, and the real reason for that is, number one, the solder pads are correct and easy to solder. They're not dangling off the side, so you're not going to like crack them off very easily. The battery lead solder pads are reasonable size, not like the HGLRC ones that are so tiny you can't even solder wires onto them. And the whole thing works pretty well. The video has this tendency to kind of have some noise, but it might just be the two builds that I've used it in. I'm not sure. That's the only kind of question mark I have, is the video might have a little bit of noise, but other than that, I think that is the best stack right now, but it's still not, it doesn't quite meet all my requirements. The Ori is the best 4-in-1, but it weighs 8.5 grams, so it's a little bit heavy for this size class. The goal here is to find an ESC that can actually put out the power you need, but doesn't weigh a ton. The weight is very, very crucial in this size class. Okay, so that's enough with that. And now about VTXs. So the VTX that I have on here, which is the Diatone, I don't remember the name of the VTX. I think it's the DT03, not the DTX03, just the DT03. This is the best micro VTX I found so far. I know that the Micro Unify just came out, and that's kind of in the same size category, and I bet that's probably better than this. But there's one real issue with these VTXs. They only run off 5 volts. So in order to power this VTX, as well as the Micro Unify, as well as lots of other micro VTXs, including this one, including the DTX03, you have to power it off the BEC on your flight controller, because your 4-in-1 probably does not put 5 volt out. And powering a VTX off your flight controller or any BEC that's on board is not a great idea, because you run the risk of burning out the BEC, because the VTX actually draws a fair bit of milliamps because it's putting out a lot of power. It usually draws about 300 to 400 milliamps, which I've measured on 50 milliwatt, which is what I'm running all these on. When you push it up to 200 milliwatts, it's going to draw like 400, 500 milliamps, and that's just too much for a tiny BEC. Even if the BEC is rated to like 1.5 amps, when you're driving higher volts through it and it's kicking down the voltage and doing all this stuff, you don't want to overstress these BECs. So ideally, the VTX would have its own BEC built in, and that's what the HGLRC VTX is in this thing. But unfortunately, this HGLRC VTX, which is a great VTX in the sense that it's 20 by 20 mountable, it takes direct battery voltage up to 4S, and it works fantastic, except that the video is blurry. I don't know why. I put the regular VTXs on here too, and they're not as blurry, and they are much more crisp and much more sharp. So unfortunately, we don't have a VTX that I could say is ideal for this size class. And I say that it really needs to have BEC on board is because the size class really runs 3S and 4S. You're not going to be running 2S on this size class. So the rest of this video is going to be my theories, what I've found testing in this size class over a long period of time. And it's very subjective. You can agree, you can not agree. I prefer if you don't agree and you come up with your own ideas and your own experiences. But I'm going to give you what I have found. And the first thing I'm going to start, before I start off with that, the Predator FPV camera is freaking awesome. It's hands down the best FPV camera I've used to date. Better than the monster cameras that are widescreen because they have a much better field of view, and the HDR on the camera is freaking amazing. The one real downside is that DVRs have a little bit of a problem recording the video from the Predator, because I don't know, I think the HDR is kind of just screwing it up, and instead of recording it appropriately, it kind of just makes everything a little bit darker, which is kind of weird. So in post-processing, you have to kind of fire up the lights, and you have to fire up the shadows a little bit as well, just brighten the whole thing. to get it to actually look normal. I'm going to link a video in the description below which shows you what happens when you just export raw video from the camera. It just kind of comes out dim and dark. Okay, so top battery versus bottom battery is the first thing I want to talk about, and that I cannot even believe that it's more pronounced in this 2.5 inch class than it is in 5 inch. I was totally floored. Just the same day that I started testing that, I was talking to guys at Pureflip, and we all kind of agreed, like, it's so light, it's so tiny. Why would moving this little weight of battery around matter? And it's got so much performance from the motors, anyways. It shouldn't really make a difference. But then I tested it that evening, and blown away, totally blown away. But then I went back and tested my bottom mount, and I also started talking to a lot of the people that I normally talk to about these micro things. And so I've come up with this little culmination of how to run a bottom mount. So you can run bottom mount, and it can perform the same or even better than the top mount quads that I have here, but you have different weight restrictions. So for bottom mount, you want to have your quad a lot lighter. So these two quads are 87 grams 87.1 grams exactly. Both of them are the same, even though they're totally different builds. And that's a little bit hefty for this size class. If you look at my video before, you would see that my weight limit that I put on myself for a 2.5 inch is about 130 grams all up weight. And at 87 grams with a 3S 450 or 500 milliamp pack, that puts these things at about 135 grams all up weight. And that is just slightly less than I wanted, slightly more than I wanted, but it works, it's okay. And if you put a bottom mount battery on a quad like that, it feels sloppy. It honestly just feels like it's wobbling around, and it's just not good. So the frame setup actually makes a pretty significant difference to how you mount your battery. And if you want to run a bottom mount battery, I would recommend trying to keep your all up weight under 125 grams. And that's going to give you just better performance with bottom mount. On top of that, if you want to run various different props on a bottom mount battery quad, it doesn't really make as much of a difference whether you go with the quad blade or the tri blade or pretty much any other tri blade 2.5 inch prop. You can't feel it as much, which I found extremely interesting as well. Across multiple quads, I tested multiple props, and I could barely feel a difference. But on the top mounts, I could feel the difference between every single prop that I put on there. I can easily tell the difference between the HQ prop and the Gemfan prop, which honestly, these things are so tiny. I don't know why you can tell any of these differences. If you're looking for the absolute maximum control, this is what you want. You want the super light, super duper light with super duper big props. This quad is 70 grams all up weight with 2S battery, and it has far superior control. With the bottom mount battery top, it doesn't matter. This quad has far superior control than anything else I've built. I don't even understand how I can power loop anything with this quad because of the crazy control. But it's just not as fun because it's 2S. I mean, you really want the 3S power. If you want something cheap, not cheap, just cheaper, light and fun to fly around, this is the quad you want. And I'm kind of debating whether I should even release this, because at the $130 price tag it would cost to build this, roughly, you could probably get it down to 120. I don't know if it's even worth it. You should just buy a Babyhawk R and yeah, leave it at that. This is my recent Tooth Fairy prototype that I've redesigned. The original Tooth Fairy that came out was never actually supposed to be sold. It was really a super prototype and was only sold based on popular demand. I started it as a very small, light 2-inch quad frame, but then people wanted to run 3-inch and 4-inch and 5-inch on it, so I started beefing up the center body more and more and more, and it just became just this heap of junk that, I mean, I guess it performs great on 4-inch and 5-inch, but it's not very good on 2-inch or 2.5-inch. So I had to go back and redesign the quad, and this quad, I'm hoping to only offer it in 2.5-inch, 3-inch, and 4-inch. It's 18 grams, and the biggest change is that the whole stack is mounted on TPU. So this layer here, this middle layer, it's not actually carbon, it's a layer of TPU, and that's the magic, because soft mounting on these little tiny things is just so darn important, even on this tiny little class, that it's necessary. And it cost me 1.8 grams of weight for me to do that, but I never have to worry about soft mounting, and it's wonderful. 18 grams is a little bit hefty. I'm still looking for ways to cut the weight. I'm hoping I can get a gram off of it if I can, but mean, it's already performing so well. I'm really surprised at how well it's performing. This is the best performing micro I've built to date. It's like a star micro, and that's the one I'm going to give to Sergio to fly to see what he thinks. Don't forget to floss. Sorry about the super long video, or not. I don't know. Maybe you found it interesting. I just kind of did this video as a test to see what people would think, because I mean, I could keep talking on and on and on. Yeah, that's it. Let me know. Bye-bye.